The Revolutionary Guards in Iran are threatening. They are returning to the track of producing nuclear weapons. The United States and Iran opened a surprise barrage of attacks against each other. So is the war erupting again? In the Revolutionary Guards, they're laughing at Donald Trump and revealing a new drone and threatening to strike the American military. Following the tension in Hormuz, the United States and Iran canceled the continuation of the negotiation talks. So, is the ceasefire collapsing? What do you think? It is still not clear, but the exchanges of fire in the Gulf are intensifying. The United States again struck in Iran, and Iran responded with fire towards Kuwait and Bahrain. Why are the countries that did not surrender to Iran's protection now taking the fire? It seems that following the confrontation with the United States, Iran is trying to advance a new security structure in the Gulf region against Washington. In Lebanon, they are preparing for a harsh response by the Hezbollah terrorist organization to this agreement and warning against attempts by Iran to sabotage it. The United States will train forces in Lebanon, and the goal is disarming the Hezbollah terrorist organization. And inside Iran, are the Revolutionary Guards going through a new shakeup? And is it possible that the fall of the regime is closer than we thought? I'm Yair Pinto. With me is Mati Shoshani, and we are here on Boots on the Ground. We bring you the whole truth about what is happening in Israel and also the whole truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. So let's begin. Because the temporary and fragile ceasefire agreement between the United States and Iran, signed less than 2 weeks ago with the goal of ending the war and beginning at the end of February, is now facing total collapse because Tehran sent firm messages to Washington through the mediators and threatened that the escalation of the last few days could blow up this agreement entirely. And meanwhile, the talks that were supposed to take place in Switzerland next week were cancelled. Last night, on Saturday night, Iran's Revolutionary Guards launched barrages of missiles and drones towards the United States military facilities in Kuwait and Bahrain. The Iranian attacks came just hours after the President of the United States, Donald Trump, published an unprecedented threat on his social media network, warning that Iran will cease to exist if Washington is forced to renew this war. In Bahrain, serious damage was caused to a building as a result of the Iranian attack, and at the same time, the Iranian missiles and drones were also launched towards Kuwait. On the other side, the United States struck 10 Iranian military targets in the Hormuz area. The latest escalation happened, amongst other things, following the renewal of Revolutionary Guards attacks against tankers in the area in recent days, even though the agreement states that the strait is supposed to be open to everyone. And this is happening even though just last week, Washington fulfilled a significant commitment on its part and lifted sanctions on the Iranian oil for 60 days. This is a step that greatly helps the faltering economy of the Islamic Republic. So, what are the Iranians actually trying to achieve now? This is where the developments in Lebanon come in, because in Tehran, they saw Friday's signing of the agreement between Israel and the Lebanese government that was mediated by the Americans as the exclusion of Hezbollah and decided to act. Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem sharply attacked the agreement yesterday and called it a historic mistake. He made clear that the terrorist organization that he heads is committed to the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed between the United States and Iran, and not to the agreement signed between Israel and Lebanon. The Hezbollah Secretary General rejected any conditional withdrawal by the IDF and made clear that the organization will continue fighting as long as Israel operates on the Lebanese soil. The harsh opposition of Hezbollah, the Amal movement, and their allies to the framework agreement with Israel shows that the next battle will not take place only against Israel, but also inside Lebanon. The success of the agreement depends on one big question. will the Lebanese state be able for the first time to impose its sovereignty on Hezbollah, or will Iran succeed in sabotaging the move and returning Lebanon to the track of unity of the fronts? So Israel sees the framework agreement that was signed with Lebanon and the United States as a far-reaching strategic move, one that goes far beyond the specific arrangement on the northern border. Southern Lebanon must be demilitarized. Hezbollah and all the other non-state organizations must be disarmed. That's the heart of this agreement. This is an event that could rise in importance even above the Abraham Accords, because here we're talking about a neighboring country, a country on Israel's border, and two peoples that have suffered for years from Islamist terrorism and from destructive influence of the Revolutionary Guards in Iran. If this agreement combined with cooperation and international assistance helps Lebanon dismantle Hezbollah, this could be a very major event in the history of the Middle East. And we will bring you all the details. But behind the scenes, it seems that the Iranians have not lost their ambitions for an atomic bomb for even a moment, because an official media outlet close to the Revolutionary Guards declares that the Islamic Republic has no choice but to develop nuclear weapons. This severe threat comes after Iran violated the ceasefire, and despite the continuation of the negotiations, the Ayatollah regime is opening a new front against Israel and against the United States, this time in the legal arena, at the court in The Hague. Mustafa Khamenei called for putting the two countries on trial for war crimes. And this comes while the regime itself, according to its opponents, is responsible for murderous repression, mass arrests, and tens of thousands of victims amongst protesters and Iranian civilians over the years. So, as you can see, we have a lot ahead of us. So let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, coming to you now from Switzerland. And with me is Mati Shoshani. And we're here on Boots on the Ground. We bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel and about the war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And 1 second before we begin, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click on the subscribe button, and most importantly, don't forget to look for me, Yair Pinto, and Mati Shoshani on our social media accounts to get a view through our eyes of what it's like to live in Israel under this war. Because as missiles are falling and there are threats of nuclear bombs from Iran that are rising again, many people are asking how they can stand with Israel in a meaningful way. So the answer is simple. Help us rebuild. We invite you to take part in something real, something that is rooted in the land and in our hearts. The Rebuild Israel campaign continues. It's bringing life back to Israel's north. So along Israel's northern border, an area marked by war, displacement, and loss, we are planting an apple orchard, not as a symbol for a single moment, but as part of a long-term commitment to restore what was damaged and strengthen Israel's future. At a time when Israel is under attack, planting trees is a powerful declaration. We're still here. We're rebuilding. We are growing. We're not leaving anywhere, because God promised this land to the people of Israel, and together we can help it flourish once again. So this apple orchard is more than just agriculture. It creates jobs for local families. It helps communities return and rebuild. And it sends a clear message to the people of Israel: you are not alone. So when you donate, you're not just giving, you're rebuilding. Your support puts trees in the ground. It restores livelihoods and transforms land that is scarred by war into a land that grows again. This is how renewal takes root. This is how Israel rebuilt after war. So stand with Israel today. Plant a tree, plant hope, restore the north, and strengthen the future. So okay, how you can do that? You can do that by going to tbn.org/rebuildisrael. Again, that's tbn.org/rebuildisrael, or call 800-804-7895. Again, that's 800-804-7895. Rebuild the land, restore hope, bless the future. And now, we will return to our senior Middle East correspondent, Mati Shoshani. So Mati is currently at the conference against anti-Semitism in England. And he's here to bring us what's happening behind the headlines and why every moment in this region feels like everything is changing from end to end. So over to you, Mati Shoshani.
Is there a ceasefire or is there not a ceasefire between Iran and the US? Is Iran going to meddle in Lebanon, or are the US, Israel, and the Lebanese government going to sign their own agreement? Well, there's a lot happening right now in the news. It is wildly confusing. Let's take 2 minutes and try to break down what's actually happening here on the ground in a more substantive way, in a more deep way. What we're witnessing in front of our eyes is a power struggle. It's not confusion. It's not misunderstanding. It's not an agreement. It is a power struggle taking place between Iran and the United States and Iranian proxies and Israel. That is what's happening in front of our eyes. And let me really break this down for you in a more systematic way. What we've been witnessing in the Strait of Hormuz is exactly that. Over the last couple of days, continuously the Iranians violate the ceasefire agreement that's taking place in Iran, in the Strait of Hormuz, in the Gulf states. Why are they doing that? They're testing to see if the United States will be strong enough, resolute enough, clear enough to make sure that they uphold the agreement. But at the same time, it also indicates, it informs us of the power struggle that's taking place inside of Iran between the IRGC and factions related to Mujtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader, between the civil servants, Pezeshkian, and others, Zarif, who are struggling for power or struggling to reach an agreement, and the IRGC that wants to promote a end times eschatological narrative or theology or chain of events in the Middle East. But this goes on. The same happens in Lebanon. Iran is trying to affect what's happening in Lebanon, and Israel and the United States are responding to that pressure by pushing back on Iran, pushing back on Iranian interests, pushing back on Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy. And in this situation, things are getting mighty uncomfortable for the Iranian regime, incredibly uncomfortable. When you combine the financial pressure, the culmination, the accumulation of the military pressure, the blockade, the inability to export oil, the pressure on their infrastructure that has taken place, we're seeing the Iranians looking for a way to poke at the Americans, looking for a way to violate the ceasefire, looking for a way to come up with the upper hand in the negotiation. And the US is doing the right thing with the Iranians. When they try to violate, there's an immediate slap on the wrist, an immediate response. When they try to close off Israel's ability to fight against their proxy, Hezbollah in Lebanon, an immediate response by signing a deal over the head of the Iranians with Lebanon and with Israel. Now, I'm not saying things are simple, because they're not. Things are not simple, things are not easy, things are not done. We're probably going to see multiple months more of ongoing pressure, ongoing conflict, ongoing unpleasantness between the Iranians and the Americans in the Middle East. That is the situation here, full stop. That's not going to change. What is important now, though, is for the US forces in this region, for the Trump White House to be resolute, to be clear, to be steadfast in pushing through a powerful agreement against Iran and enforcing that agreement. That's really what's happening here. And everything else that you're hearing in the headlines, Iran does this, Iran attacks here, the US responds here, it's all that. It's a power struggle to see how resolute the US will be. That is what we're watching unfold in front of our eyes. Several months ago, when the negotiations were taking place with the patronage of Pakistan in Islamabad, the Iranians pulled a bunch of tricks in the negotiation, and the US negotiation team looked at that and said, we're out. They packed their bags, they got on Air Force 2, and they left, letting the Iranians know they will not allow them to meddle, to pressure, to manipulate. The same needs to happen now. Ongoing, systematic, consistent, meaningful pressure on Iran to make sure that they don't violate the agreement, to make sure that their internal forces that are each vying for power, each positioning themselves to be more combative or less combative against the US, that they understand the only thing they can do, the only out they have is a strong agreement with the United States. And the US needs to ensure that that agreement ensures that there's no nuclear, no proxy, no ballistic that is allowed for the Iranians. That is a simple reality here. That's the only way things are going. And that's why the news is so confusing. One day we're talking about an agreement. The next day, the Iranians and the US are fighting in the Strait of Hormuz. One day we're talking about peace, then there's attacks on Gulf states. One day we're talking about an agreement in Lebanon, and the very next day, Lebanon and Israel and the US sign an agreement against Iranian influence, against Iranian proxy, which is Hezbollah. That is what we're witnessing in front of our eyes, a power balance, a power fight over what will happen in the day after, and a testing of the resolve of the Trump White House to see how resolute will they be. And so far, the US is showing consistency in not allowing wiggle room for the Iranians, and Israel has done exactly the same thing. Sometime in the future, it might be 2 to 3 months, things will resolve themselves, or in the sense of an agreement, or an agreement that falls apart altogether, and then we'll see a more open, overt conflict. But until that happens, there's going to be more consistent back and forth testing of the ability, the resolve, the clarity of mind, the clarity of morals, to see how strong the US and by extension Israel will be against Iranian meddling. This is important. This is a battle between what's happening now and the future of this region. What's happening now and what Iranian proxy warfare will look like in the future, what American presence and American projection of power will look like in the future of the Middle East. That is a lot. That is worth praying for, focusing on, and talking about also in the months to come. And of course, we will be here to update you as things progress.
Thank you very much, Mati. That certainly helped us better understand the situation, what we're facing with, and how we can pray. So, and to all of you, keep spreading the truth. You can do that by hitting the subscribe button on TBN Israel YouTube channel. That's the way to help us reach more people around the world. You can do that by looking up Yair Pinto and Mati Shoshani on our social media accounts and following us. And you can do that, of course, by praying for the situation. So the United States struck again inside Iran, and Iran is already firing back into the heart of the Gulf. Over the weekend, American aircraft struck military targets in southern Iran. After commercial vessels were attacked in the area of the Strait of Hormuz, the targets included surveillance systems, communications, air defenses, drone storage, and facilities connected to mine lane capabilities. A short time later, the Revolutionary Guards announced that they had launched missiles and drones towards American bases in Bahrain and Kuwait. And the question now is very simple. Is this still a ceasefire being tested on the ground, or have we already returned to war, just under a different name? The flare-up began around the Strait of Hormuz, the place where Iran feels that it has its strongest pressure lever against the United States, against the Gulf states, and against the global energy market. The cargo ship Ever Lovely, flying the Singaporean flag, was attacked by a suicide drone while sailing near the coast of Oman. Later, reports also came of a strike on a giant oil tanker named Kiko under the Panamanian flag, which left the El Shaheen oil field in Qatar on its way to the United Arab Emirates. The drone hit the upper deck, caused structural damage, but the vessel was able to continue sailing. This is exactly the Iranian method. Always need to sink a ship in order to change the rules of the game. It's enough to hit the deck, issue a warning, and make insurance companies, ship owners, and captains understand that from now on, every passage through Hormuz costs more than money. It's a cost risk, and it's affecting the politics. So the United States Central Command presented the strikes as a response to Iranian aggression against the commercial shipping. According to the American statement, the strikes targeted Iran's ability to threaten shipping lanes, coastal radars, drone facilities, and communication systems, including air defensive systems and facilities connected to mine lane. In other words, Washington was not only trying to punish Iran, it was trying to hit the tools that allowed the Revolutionary Guards to turn Hormuz into a passage route that requires Iranian approval. Iran, for its part, claims that the exact opposite happened. In Tehran, they say that the strait is under Iranian supervision and that any ship passing through a route not approved by the Islamic Republic does so on its own responsibility. Iranian officials have already made clear that ships that do not stick to the routes that were declared by the Revolutionary Guards will not receive safe passage guarantees, insurance coverage, or a commitment to protection. This is no longer only a military threat. It's a way to manage the maritime traffic like a licensing system. Iran is not only telling the world do not pass, it is saying pass when we decide and at the price that we are prepared to dictate. This is where the Iranian response against Bahrain and Kuwait also comes in, because the Revolutionary Guards claimed that they attacked 8 American military infrastructure facilities, including Ali Shami Air Base in Kuwait and the headquarters of the 5th Fleet in Bahrain. And at the same time, Bahrain reported Iranian drones fired towards a strategic target. One was intercepted and another crashed in an open area inside the compound of a local airport without casualties and without significant damage. But the message was clear. Bahrain and Kuwait are not only small Gulf states, they are part of the American military network in the region. Bahrain hosts the 5th Fleet. Kuwait is an important American military foothold. That's the way, and that is why every drone that enters their territory is also a threat to Washington and also a message to the rest of the Gulf states. Whoever does not reach understandings with Iran will pay. In the Gulf, the Iranians understand this very well. The Gulf Cooperation Council looks weaker today than ever before. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Oman, Kuwait, and Bahrain are supposed to be one bloc facing the Iranian threat, but in practice, each country is now looking for its own channel with Tehran. Some are opening quiet channels, some are trying to buy quiet, some are leaning on America, and some are taking the fire. According to published assessments, Saudi Arabia was attacked less. Oman did not confront the Iranian demands in Hormuz head-on, and the United Arab Emirates acted in its own way to stop these attacks. Those left more exposed are Bahrain and Kuwait, 2 small countries dependent on the Gulf and very close to the American military network. And that's why the economic story here is no less important than the military story. Oil and gas are not just a resource. In countries like Kuwait and Qatar, they're a huge part of the national GDP. Qatar and Kuwait do not really have a significant export route that does not pass through Hormuz. The United Arab Emirates has Fujairah outside the strait, and Saudi Arabia also has a route through the Red Sea. But even there are limitations. And that's why every disruption in Hormuz turns within hours into a problem of insurance, of fuel prices, inflation, markets, and eventually political pressure on the White House. Iran knows this. It may not have won the military campaign, but it is using Hormuz like a skilled merchant in the bazaar. It does not need to close the strait completely. It only needs to remind the world that it can make it dangerous, expensive, and unpredictable. And that is enough to raise the prices, to pressure the markets, and to make Washington look for a way down from the tree without appearing weak. So against exactly this background, Tehran is now proposing that the Gulf states establish a new regional security structure. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi called in Baghdad on the Gulf states to build a joint security mechanism without dependencies on external forces. A few hours before that, Iran attacked Bahrain and Kuwait, and then it offered them a new security order. In the Middle East, sometimes this is diplomacy. First you shoot, then you offer a round table and discussions. But Tehran is not stopping at Hormuz. At the same time, a media outlet close to the Revolutionary Guards published an article stating that Iran has no choice but to develop an atomic bomb. The argument was clear. Only nuclear deterrence will allow Iran to negotiate from a position of strength with the United States and Israel. The article even compared Iran to China in the 1970s, arguing that only after China obtained nuclear weapons did the United States have to speak with it seriously. This is an important moment, because while the regime speaks outwardly about an agreement, inspections, technical talks, and diplomacy, inside its own systems, there is a completely different discussion that is already taking place. Not how to calm the crisis, but how to reach nuclear deterrence that will change the entire balance of power. And when this is said in a media outlet identified with the Revolutionary Guards, It is not a slip of the tongue. It is preparation of public concessions. And at the same time, regime spokesmen continue attacking the Gulf states for their silence towards Israel. I claim that Iran's military capabilities are a natural right of our self-defense. In other words, on one hand, Iran threatens civilian ships, launches drones at Bahrain and Kuwait, and talks about nuclear bombs. On the other hand, it presents itself as the victim that needs protection. This is not a contradiction from the regime's point of view. This is the method. On-the-ground military pressure in negotiations and then demands. In the legal arena, accusations against Israel in the United States, and at home, internal repression. Inside Iran itself, the pressure is being felt. Experts on the Iranian arena point to a leadership vacuum. Distrust at the top and fear in the street that has not disappeared. Last week, according to reports, 4 major banks were shut down. There were no ATMs, no apps, and the public once again saw how a state that spends billions on Hezbollah, on drones, and on missiles struggles to produce basic services to its citizens. The protests in Iran are not only about money. They sometimes begin with the cost of living, banks, electricity, or water, but very quickly they reach a deeper question: who controls the life of the Iranian person? Masha Amini did not become a symbol because of the price of bread. She became a symbol because a young woman could not walk in the street without the regime deciding what she was allowed to wear, how she was allowed to live, and what happens if she does not obey. And that's the regime's real fear. Not only an American strike, not only an Israeli aircraft, but the moment when the Iranians themselves stop being afraid, but instead of freeing its own people, the regime continues investing in the axis of evil, in terrorism around the Middle East. According to estimates, even in years of water, electricity, and economic crisis, Iran continued transferring huge sums to Hezbollah, including money through the digital channels. The moment that the Iranian money is released, it does not remain only in banks. In our region, Iranian money very quickly becomes missiles, salaries, tunnels, drones, production workshops, precision rockets, and smuggling. And that brings us to Lebanon. While Hormuz is burning, the agreement between Israel and Lebanon opened a new front against Hezbollah. Israel, the United States, and Lebanon signed a framework agreement whose goal is to return sovereignty to the Lebanese government and the Lebanese army. From Israel's point of view, the agreement ties an IDF withdrawal from southern Lebanon to the dismantling of Hezbollah infrastructure, the distancing of the organization, and the security of the residents of the north. So this is a dramatic point. Israel is not saying we leave and then we will see what happens. We see a real distancing of the threat, and then we talk about withdrawal. That's why the IDF remains in the security zone, including strategic areas like the Beaufort Ridge, as long as Hezbollah is not disarmed and is not pushed away from that area. Hezbollah understands the meaning very well. Naim Qassem harshly attacked the agreement, claimed that it harms Lebanon's sovereignty, rejected any connection between an Israeli withdrawal and the disarming of Hezbollah, and made clear that the organization will continue the resistance as long as Israel operates on Lebanese soil. From his point of view, the agreement does not exist. From Iran's point of view, it is very dangerous because it is trying to take Lebanon out of Tehran's control equation. Iran is already demanding a timetable for an Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon and presenting it as a condition for implementing the Memorandum of Understanding with the United States. This is exactly the point. Tehran wants its agreement with Washington to also determine what happens in Lebanon. Israel and Lebanon, with American mediation, they are trying to tell it, no, Lebanon is not an Iranian cause. It is a state. And inside Lebanon itself, the next 72 hours have been described as critical. Political figures in the country are warning of a violent Hezbollah response, attacks, assassinations, wide protests, or an attempt to ignite the street. Already over the weekend, Hezbollah activists went out to demonstrate at several points in Beirut, including in the area of the road to the airport. Some of the activists were armed. The Lebanese security forces responded this time with force, including batons and tear gas. This is not a small detail. The road to the Beirut airport is a symbol. In 2008, Hezbollah used that exact area to show the state who was in charge. Now, it returned there, but found a different reality. The Lebanese army and the security forces are no longer rushing to move aside. This is still far from decision making, but it is the beginning of a test. On the ground, the IDF is also continuing to operate. The Air Force eliminated Hezbollah terrorists armed with an RPG, who were identified in southern Lebanon by forces of the elite unit Egoz of the IDF that were operating in the Nabtia area. In another strike, forces from the multidimensional unit of the IDF destroyed a Hezbollah launcher that posed a threat to our forces, meaning even during agreements, even during signatures, and even during diplomacy, the IDF continues to remove threats in practice. And just before we continue, this is exactly the moment when we need you with us. So share this report with as many people as possible. Click on the subscribe button. Keep following Boots on the Ground to receive the truth in real time. Not after the world arranges the headlines for itself. Not after someone else decides for you what matters. Here, we explain to you what's happening in Israel and what's happening in the Middle East and what really stands behind the headlines. So, hit the subscribe button on TBN Israel YouTube channel. Look for me, Yair Pinto, and for Mati Shoshani on our social media accounts to see life in Israel through our eyes of what's happening in this region. Because the challenge in Lebanon is very great. The agreement rests on pilot areas where the IDF is supposed to withdraw gradually and the Lebanese army is supposed to enter, push Hezbollah away, dismantle terror infrastructure, and prevent the organization from returning. On paper, this sounds clear. On the ground, it is one of the hardest tests that the Lebanese state has received since the establishment of Hezbollah. For decades, the Lebanese army avoided the real confrontation with Hezbollah. A significant portion of the soldiers and the officers come from the Shiite community. The army commander, Rudolf Haikal, is seen in Israel as someone who may make implementation of the agreement more difficult. That's why the question is not whether a document was signed. The question is whether the Lebanese army will truly enter the villages, dismantle the infrastructure, and prevent Hezbollah from returning to the area after the IDF leaves. Hezbollah knows that if this move succeeds, it is not only a military blow, it is a historic blow. Because for the first time, the Lebanese government, the Lebanese army, Israel, and the United States are on the same side of the one equation: to take the weapons out of Hezbollah and return sovereignty to the state. That's why the organization is now using the most frightening threat in Lebanon, fitna, which is civil strife. This is a word that activates very deep fear in the Lebanese society. It recalls the civil war, burned Beirut, checkpoints, sects, and blood in the streets. Hezbollah is trying to tell the Lebanese people, if you touch our weapons, the country will burn. But something has changed. More and more Lebanese are blaming Hezbollah for bringing them destruction, displaced families, a crushed economy, a devastated south, and the return of the IDF to a security zone. On social media and in the Lebanese media, more and more voices are being heard against the organization, as well as open support for the idea of an arrangement with Israel. This does not mean Hezbollah has disappeared. It is still armed, dangerous, and capable of setting Lebanon on fire if it chooses to. But it is no longer standing before a silent society as it did in the past. This is where everything connects: Hormuz, the nuclear issue, Lebanon, Hezbollah, and the Iranian street. Iran is trying to survive the campaign without appearing defeated. It uses the Strait of Hormuz to pressure Washington. It uses Hezbollah to pressure Israel and Lebanon. It talks about the nuclear bomb in order to deter. It proposes a new security mechanism in the Gulf in order to push America out. And it threatens in the legal arena in order to turn itself from victimizer into plaintiff. Mustafa Khamenei, who is still surrounded by heavy questions and regarding his status and his public appearance, called for legal action against Israel and against the United States. This is happening in local and international courts. This is another attempt to move the battle from the ground to the realm of consciousness. And after the regime fired, repressed, threatened, and attacked civilian shippings, it wants to go to The Hague and say, we are the victims, to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. But reality does not fit this performance. If Iran wants peace, why is it threatening ships? If it wants stability in the Gulf, why is it firing at Bahrain and Kuwait? If it wants a nuclear agreement, why does a media outlet close to the Revolutionary Guards write that there is no choice but to build an atomic bomb? And if it wants Lebanese sovereignty, why is it demanding to decide on Lebanon's behalf what will happen on the border with Israel? This is exactly the campaign now. Not only aircrafts and missiles. This is a war over rules, who decides where a ship passes, who decides whether Hezbollah remains armed, who decides whether Iran receives money and invests in the economic recovery of the country or in missiles, who decides whether Lebanon will be a state or another arena on the map of the Revolutionary Guard's control. The coming days will be very dangerous. The talks between the United States and Iran have already been cancelled or suspended around the escalation in Hormuz. Tehran has passed firm messages to mediators, and in Washington, they are threatening that violence will be met with violence. And in Israel, they are preparing for the possibility that Iran or Hezbollah will try to blow up the agreement in Lebanon in order to prevent a new reality on the northern border. In the end, the test will not be in the statements. It will be in the route of the next ship in Hormuz, in the next village in southern Lebanon, and in Hezbollah's next response. If Iran succeeds in turning every agreement into another way to buy time, the entire region will very quickly return to the boiling point. And the question is, who will break first? The ceasefire, the agreement in Lebanon, or a regime that fears its own people no less than it fears the Americans or Israel? So help us spread the truth. Again, you can do that by clicking the subscribe button on TBN Israel YouTube channel, where we report every single day about what's happening in this war. You can follow us, you can share the video, you can look for our social media accounts, Yair Pinto, Mati Shoshani, or TBN Israel, and you can pray for the situation. Best thing you can do. I know that there are millions of you around the world that stand with Israel and stand with God's plans for our land, for our region, for our people. God is faithful, but He wants us to talk to Him, to ask for help. So let's do that. When we do it, make it personal. Pray for the IDF soldiers. Pray for the babies, the children of the North. Pray for wisdom to our leaders that are in the negotiations rooms. Pray for the Iranian people that are under severe repression now. Pray for the Lebanese people. They need to make very tough decisions internally. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.